Today we are talking about dividing fractions. Keep in mind, if at any point you have questions, raise your hand and your teacher will come over and help explain it. And if at any point I'm going too quickly, you can pause and rewind the video. One of the main things that I want to point out right off the bat with dividing fractions is that you do not need a common denominator. With multiplying and dividing fractions, a common denominator is completely unnecessary. We are first going to talk about dividing fractions when you do not have any mixed numbers or whole numbers. In that case, you only have 4 steps to divide your fractions. The first one is KCF, which is a shortcut for saying keep, change, and flip. What you're going to do is you're going to keep your first fraction the exact same. You are going to change your division symbol to multiplication, and you are going to flip your last fraction. We are going to start referring to this as multiplying by the reciprocal. We're going to be talking about that in class. We're going to be asking you to remember that. And the reciprocal, that is the flip part. So when you flip that second fraction, what you are doing is creating a reciprocal. Okay? After you keep, change, flip, your next step is to cross cancel. Cross-canceling is a way to simplify early on, and this makes your numbers easier to work with because they are smaller. I will be showing how to cross-cancel later on in the examples. If you do not know how, you can always just wait to simplify at the end. After doing keep, change, flip, and cross-canceling, next you are going to multiply straight across. So you're going to multiply your numerators across the top, and you're going to multiply your denominators across the bottom. Your fourth and final step, it's always what we check at the end with doing anything with fractions, is if we can, we are going to simplify our fraction. So we always check that at the end. So in this picture, it just kind of shows you the general steps. We are first given the problem 3/4 divided by 1/6. The first thing you are going to do, since we do not have any mixed numbers or whole numbers, is to keep, change, flip. Again, that's called the reciprocal. This right here are your reciprocals. Okay, so 1/6 and 6/1 are reciprocals. They're the flip of each other. Once we do keep, change, flip, we are left with 3/4 times 6/1. From there, you could have cross-canceled, or you can multiply straight across, and that's how they got the 18/4. 3 times 6 is 18. 4 times 1 is 4. And finally, you need to simplify. 4 can go into 18 4 times. That's where the whole number comes from. 4 times 4 is 16. So what you have left over, or when you subtract, is 2/4, which we know simplifies to 4 1/2. That would be your answer in simplest form. So we are going to practice this a couple times. Again, we are practicing right now without any mixed numbers or whole numbers. So our first problem is 4/5 divided by 2/3. Again, you do not need a common denominator when dividing. So the first thing we are going to do is keep, change, and flip. I'm going to keep 4/5 exactly how it is. Change division to multiplication, and finally flip my second fraction. Again, 2/3 and 3/2 are reciprocals of each other. They're the flip. The next thing I'm going to try and do is cross cancel. So I'm going to look at numbers that are across from each other, diagonal. So I've got 5 and 3, which are across from each other. And unfortunately, there's no way to simplify those. They do not have any common factors or things we can divide them by. Our other set of numbers that are across from each other are 4 and 2. We can cross cancel those. They are both even numbers, so we can divide them both by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. That is the cross cancel step. That's where you check numbers that are diagonal from each other and see if they have any common factors or things you can divide them by. Step 3 is to multiply across. So I'm going to multiply straight across my numerators. 2 times 3 is 6. Straight across my denominator. 5 times 1 is 5. And my final step is to simplify. This is an improper fraction. So the first question I'm going to ask myself is how many times 5 can go into 6? Well, it can go in one whole time, which is where my whole number comes from. My denominator will stay the same. And if it goes in one whole time, that means I'm going to subtract 5 away from 6 one time. And what is left over when I subtract them is 1. So my final answer in simplest form is 1 1/5. We're going to practice that one more time with our second example there. 1/2 divided by 8/9. I'm going to start with keep, change, and flip. I'm going to keep 1/2 how it is, change division and multiplication, and flip my second fraction. Again, that's also called multiplying by the reciprocal. The next thing I'm going to check is if I can cross cancel. So my numbers that are across from each other are 1 and 8. Unfortunately, I cannot simplify any of that. And 2 and 9. Again, no common factors there. I cannot cross cancel. So I have to move on to step 3, which is to multiply straight across. So 1 times 9 for my numerators is 9. And 2 times 8 for my denominator is 16. Then I have to think if I can simplify that at all. Think about your factors. The factors of 9 are 1, 9, and 3. The factors of 16 are 1, 16, 2, 8, and 4. Unfortunately, they do not have any factors in common, so this is actually in simplest form for this one. Our final answer is 9/16. Going to the back for our next set of steps here, we're going to talk about how we divide when we do have mixed numbers or we do have whole numbers. So the very first step, and this is new, is we are going to change each mixed number to an improper fraction first. That is the very first thing we need to do. Change every single mixed number or whole number to an improper fraction. The picture below shows how you do that. You're going to multiply the whole number in the denominator, and then you're going to add the numerator. You're going to keep your denominators the same. So in the example, you are multiplying our denominator 3 times the whole number 4. That gives you 12. Finally, you're going to add the numerator, which is 1. And 12 plus 1 is 13, which is how we've got this 13/3. Again, we've got to keep our denominator the same. After we change our mixed numbers or whole numbers into improper fractions, we are following the exact same steps as we did on the front. Okay, so after we make them improper, then we are going to multiply by the reciprocal. Again, a way to remember that is our keep, change, and flip. That's another way to say it. Okay, so we will keep our first fraction the same, change division to multiplication, flip our second fraction, and then multiply straight across. What you can do right in between step 2 and 3 that's listed is you can cross cancel, or you can multiply all the way through and simplify at the end. Again, we're going to practice this a couple times. Our first practice problem is 2 3/4 divided by 7 1/3. The first thing we are going to do is turn these mixed numbers into improper fractions. So 2 3/4. In order to make that a improper fraction, we are going to multiply 2 and 4 and then add that to our numerator. So 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11. We keep our denominator the same. For 7 1/3, we're going to follow the same process. We are going to multiply and then add. 3 times 7 is 21, and 1 plus 21 is 22. Keep your denominator the same. I'm going to rewrite my problem, and I'm going to make sure that I keep the order the same. So since 2 3/4 was in the front before, I'm now going to write the 11/4 first. I need to keep my order the same. When we are multiplying and dividing, dividing and subtracting, our order matters. Then I am going to write my division symbol, and my second number was 7 1/3. I am rewriting that as the improper fraction, 22/3. After I've made them improper, the next thing I need to do is multiply by the reciprocal, or keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep 11/4 exactly how it was, change division and multiplication, and flip my second fraction. Again, that's the reciprocal part. 22 over 3 is the reciprocal of 3 over 22. The next thing I can do, again, to make my problem easier is to look at cross-canceling. So one set of numbers that are across from each other is 4 and 3, but they cannot cross-cancel. They do not have any common factors. 11 and 22 can, however, both be divided by 11. So that's what I'm going to do. 11 divided by 11 is 1. 22 divided by 11 is 2. Now I've made my numbers much smaller to work with, which makes my problem a little easier. When I go to multiply across the top, I now have 1 times 3, which is 3, and 4 times 2, which is 8. I have to check to see if I can simplify, but in this particular situation, I cannot. 3 and 8 is in simplest form, so my final answer for this one is 3/8. Moving on to the final practice problem. I have 5 and 5/6 divided by 1 and 2/5. Step 1 is to make these improper fractions. So 5 and 5/6, I'm going to multiply my denominator times my whole number, then add my numerator. So 6 times 5 is 30, plus 5 is 35. I keep my denominator the same. For 1 and 2/5, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply my denominator and my whole number. 5 times 1 is 5. Then add my numerator. 5 plus 2 is 7. Keep our denominator the same. Now I'm going to rewrite my problem, but make sure I keep it in the same order. So instead of 5 and 5/6, I'm going to put 35 over 6 divided by, instead of 1 and 2/5, I'm going to put 7/5. I have made them improper. I have rewritten my problem. Now I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, or another way to say it is to keep, change, and flip. I'm going to keep 35 over 6 the same, chain division to multiplication, and flip my second fraction. I will now check to see if I can cross-cancel. One set is 6 and 5. They do not share any common factors, so I cannot cross-cancel there. But I can cross-cancel with 35 and 7. They are both divisible by 7. So 7 divided by 7 is 1. I'm going to cross out 7 and put 1. 35 divided by 7 is 5. I'm going to cross out 35 and put 5. Now I have much smaller, easier numbers to multiply with. So I'm going to multiply straight across. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 1 is 6. And in this scenario, I definitely have to simplify. I have an improper fraction. That's where the numerator is larger than the denominator. So to turn that into a mixed number, I need to ask how many times 6 can go into 25. So think about your multiples of 6. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. Keep going until you realize that it can go in 4 total times. 6 times 4 is 24. So that's the closest we can get. And since 6 times 4 is 24, we still have 1 left over in our numerator. Our final answer for this problem is 4 and 1/6. That is it for dividing fractions. Again, the keys there are you do not need a common denominator. If you have mixed numbers or whole numbers, you need to make them improper. And finally, your key here is doing keep, change, flip, or another way to say it is to multiply by the reciprocal. Go ahead and get your notes checked with a teacher. Make sure you did them correctly. And finally, if you have any questions or something is unclear, make sure you ask.